name's Eva Echo.
Hi, I'm Charlie Martin.
Join me on Tuesday 15th of February when I'll be sharing my own experiences and journey as a trans woman.
You can join me live online on the 24th of February where I'll be discussing my career in motorsport and what that's been like as a transgender woman.
So hi, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to today's event. So as you can see on screen, I'm Beth Rogoyski and I am the chair of the staff LGBTQ+ network. And I am thrilled today to be introducing Eva Echo, who is giving her talk titled My Transgender Experience. So I'm sure as many of you already know, Eva Echo is an activist, a public speaker and writes her own blog, Square Peg Round Hole, and whose work has twice seen her nominated as a positive role model at the National Diversity Awards, which is something I think we've all needed over the past few years. So Eva's work focuses on transgender rights, and she's here today to share her own experiences and to shed light on being transgender, and importantly, at the moment, how we can better utilise LGBTQ+ History Month to achieve some of its intended aims. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Eva. Thank you again for being a part of our fabulous DMU Pride lineup. And I'm going to hand over to you. For anybody watching, there will be a section at the end for any questions, comments, discussions, things like that. So please do post them into the chat and we will address them at the end. But over to you, Eva.
Hi, thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name's Eva Echo. My pronouns are she, they. I'm an activist, writer, public speaker, and founder of the Pass It On campaign, which was created to raise awareness, basically, of trans and non-binary struggles, and also to give a platform to those without the voice. I'm also head of engagement and communication for Birmingham Pride and a brand ambassador for the London Transgender Clinic. And because I'm one of those really annoying people who has to always be doing something and cannot sit still, I'm also part of the Crown Prosecution Service's hate crime panel. Now, I should mention that this talk could contain discussions of topics which some people may find triggering, namely mental health, suicide. This is a safe space. If you feel that it's too much, feel free to turn this off, take a bit of a break. Whoever you are, whatever your role or job title, that doesn't matter right now. We are all equal, and that's the way it should be in these sorts of spaces. Now, as much as I love a good PowerPoint presentation, I'm not going to bore you with slides or statistics. We are much more than statistics. Every trans lived experience is so unique, and there's no one way to transition. Just like a cup of tea, it's kind of all down to personal choice, even if that means you're the sort of person who likes to put the milk in before the tea bag. It's all cool. So, first and foremost, I'm transgender, and I'm proud to be, but I never used to. See, I've spent a long time getting to where I am today, even though I knew at a very young age that something wasn't quite right with me, that I didn't fit in. that I was basically very different, or felt very different to the boys around me. I felt trapped, just didn't know how to articulate it. Not everyone realizes they're trans or non-binary from a very young age, though a large percentage do, around the time when a child typically becomes self-aware. There are also those who don't realize until adulthood, and that's okay. Doesn't make them any less transgender. The thing is, whether we realize we're trans at an early age or later on in life, we're transgender right from the very start. It's a part of who we are at the very core. So let's be clear about that. It's not a choice or a phase. I mean, let's face it. Who wakes up one day and thinks, you know what? Today I'm going to be marginalized. I'm going to put myself in the line of fire for abuse or even violence. It just doesn't happen. Coming from a very traditional East Asian family, I couldn't be visible, not from a young age. As a kid, I had no choice but to just push down and bury all my feelings. My parents were never affectionate, but they wanted the best for me. The problem is their definition of best. It was based on their own lived experience, which was just skewed in so many ways. I wasn't allowed to show emotion unless it was a positive one. Anything less than that was a weakness. You've heard phrases like boys don't cry, man up, be a man, phrases which were pushed onto me and so many others from a very early age, and phrases that we know are harmful and they shape us to a certain extent. I don't say this for sympathy or anything like that, nor is it the reason I was trans, or far from it. I talk about this for context and to let people know and have an insight into the oppression that I faced at home growing up, and why even discussing gender identity was just not an option. And it's not an option for so many others, unfortunately. So when puberty came knocking at my door, it knocked hard. My life just went out of control. It went from bad to worse. And at that time, it was like being a spectator to my own life. That's the only way I can describe it. I was just there for the ride, and I had no say about the destination. I was just kind of screaming on the inside. Now, puberty it's extremely difficult for any trans person that is self-aware about gender identity at that time, because mainly the puberty effects are irreversible, leaving many suffering from gender dysphoria right through their adult life. And by the way, for those that aren't aware, gender dysphoria is the unease that a person can feel when their gender identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned with at birth. Gender identity and sexuality are two very different things, very independent of each other. Now, my gender identity is female, which is matched by my gender expression. That's how I choose to present to the world. I don't have to present in a specific way to be female, certainly not with clothes, which technically are gender neutral. It's only society that dictates who should wear what. It's impossible to fully explain how gender dysphoria affects a person, as all experiences are very individual. There's no one way to be trans, just in the same way there's no one way for each and every one of you to exist. Whatever you read in the media about trans kids not being able to make decisions for themselves about who they are, I would say that that's not the full story. It's just one side of an agenda. I know trans kids are capable of knowing who they are because I was one, even if I didn't realize what the term was at the time. So anyway, around the time of puberty, my mental health began to suffer. It went downhill spectacularly. I knew that the changes for me were wrong. I became even more of a prisoner in my own body. I started self-harming. I even attempted suicide a few times. I just could not cope with it, knowing that this is me, this is my life, and it's not the life that I wanted. At about the age of 17 or so, I developed an eating disorder. But being in denial about my gender identity, I thought that this descent into mental health turmoil was because of the bullying and a broken relationship with my biological family, that I needed some sort of control over my life. Even years of therapy later, there was very little improvement. Depression, self-harm, suicide attempts, alcohol, prescription drug abuse, they have all plagued most of my adult life because I was still in denial, basically. I knew I had to hide who I was if I was going to find a place in this world. And so I did something that so many trans people do, so many trans women do. I went to the other extreme. So basically, I was like, you know what? If I'm not a woman, I'm going to be as manly as possible. I basically adopted a role. I looked at what other men around me were doing, and I basically did my best to join in. Never lasted long, though. For a start, I hate beer. And the topics of conversation were just not for me, not at all. But this was the only way I knew how to survive. Society and my upbringing were telling me this is the way you've got to be. I was so conflicted that I could never play that role long enough. Each time I would let it get on top of me, I'd hit rock bottom when feelings about my identity came to the surface. And I realized I was living a lie. At those points, I would try suicide or resort to self-harm, but then I'd pick myself back up again and pretend all over again. But this time, a different type of manliness, a different type of person, hoping that would be me. And unfortunately for me, this vicious cycle is how I spent my adult life, hitting a dead end, resetting, doing it all over again, only to hit another dead end. The power of denial and a society that doesn't accept. For me, not being able to convey how I was feeling was a huge reason why I've always been quite detached from those around me. I found it difficult to form relationships with any level and often spent time alone. I was fine with that because in the back of my mind, I kept thinking I was a freak. Nobody would ever understand or want me. May as well be alone. I don't have to explain myself to anyone. And I only had to look at how other marginalized groups were being treated by society to kind of think I would never be accepted or treated well. Look at those people. So why bother being my authentic self? Now, before I came out, every relationship I had was self-sabotage. Being married now, it's made it so much easier to look back and realize that I was the one who wasn't able to commit to those relationships because I wasn't ready to. If anything, I'd run out of manly roles to play because nothing suited me. But that's hindsight, and that's the power of being able to look back and think, what could I have done? Why did I do those things? It wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago, everything just clicked. And I finished touring the UK with a Canadian band that I loved and respected. A dream come true for many, but it was an absolute nightmare for me because being on stage every night, meeting people afterwards, that didn't sit well with me. I felt like a complete fraud. They were essentially seeing a version of me that was carefully crafted over the years. After the tour, as any musician will tell you, post-tour blues kicked in. You just want to be back on stage again. You want that adrenaline. You want that kind of lifestyle. But in my case, it kicked in and it slapped really hard. I had reached a crossroads where I basically needed to take time out from music to finally question and explore who I am. When I did come out a few months after, it was out of necessity because I could not go on pretending. That's when I realized the control I needed wasn't because I was bullied or because I had no relationship with my parents. I mean, yeah, none of those things helped. But it was me needing control over my own body, my own direction in life. At first, I felt like an absolute criminal, even just trying to unpack certain things about why I always wanted to wear a dress and not trousers. It was difficult not to feel like a criminal because we live in a society where everything is gendered. Blue for boys, pink for girls, trousers for boys, dresses for girls. We're taught from a very young age never to question these unwritten rules, simply follow them. We're brought up in this binary world and told to follow society's unwritten rules, which, for people like me, go against how we feel on the inside. But who said those rules were right to begin with? They may have been right years ago, created to fit a purpose, but we've evolved. Society has moved on. Why haven't those rules been expanded? Why aren't definitions broadened to be more inclusive? Tradition. That's always one of the excuses, one of the reasons that people give. People use tradition as a way to basically circumvent change, making it okay not to have to be inclusive. As an example, the Wimbledon's trophy. For women, for the trophy is a dish, just a large silver plate. For men, it's an actual cup. So why do women get a dish? Well, simply, it dates back to 19th century, when a woman's place was in the house, and her source of power came from the kitchen. Sexism, thinly veiled as tradition, but it goes unchallenged because people think, oh, it's tradition, why do we need to change it? All these little things which make up our society cause trans people to feel like there's no place for us and that we must hide who we are. Since coming out, I have never ever looked back. Whilst my mental health is not 100%, let's face it, is anybody's ever 100%? I can say though, it's nowhere near as bad as it was before coming out. And I can finally see myself growing old and enjoying life. I basically use what I've been through to make the most of what I have ahead of me and to help others to understand too. There have been many, many studies into why we exist. Most notably, the theory that an influx of hormones when we're in the womb causes the brain to develop one way, but the body another. Whilst none of the theories are conclusive, there's enough to support that being transgender is not a mental health disorder. In fact, the World Health Organization declassified gender dysphoria in 2019, and it's actually recognized as a medical condition. And as an example, to all men present, you have nipples, even though they serve no function. They're just there. If anything, you just try not to catch them. That's about it. That's about as far as it goes for you. But they almost had a function. And that's because all embryos follow the female blueprint up to a certain age. By that time, when an embryo starts to go down the male path, the nipples are already there. So it could be argued that we all start off female. The potential answer lies there. And it's a very plausible one, certainly. One study actually backs this up because it found that when scanned, the brain structure and activity of trans women were the same as cisgender women, and that trans men had the same structure and activity as cisgender men. But sadly, those findings don't even stop people from hating us, even though they're so plausible, even though there could be something there. And that's because it's human nature to need to know how something works, why it exists. It's that sense and understanding that allows us to move forward. Take homosexuality, for example. In the past, there's this burning desire to find out why a man was sexually attracted to another man. Scientists even went as far as trying to find a gene that made somebody gay or lesbian. There wasn't one, but people just wanted answers. And sadly, this curiosity or desire for knowledge causes hate where there isn't one definitive answer. People are threatened by what they don't know. But why be threatened when history can teach us so much about how we behave and which direction we need to go in? I wonder, and I can't see you, so I'm really wondering, how many of you have tattoos? As you may have guessed, I quite like them. And I want gender diversity to be boring, to be mundane, like tattoos. Because, you know, has anyone had a tattoo that they've hid from a family or from friends for fear of being judged? And the reason I want to be boring like tattoos is because that means we're accepted. I mean, remember what attitudes towards tattoos were like 30 years ago. Tell someone you had a tattoo and they'd be in your face asking, wow, can I see it? Did it hurt? Why did you have it? Aren't you afraid you'll ever regret that? Tell someone now and you're met with, so who hasn't? That's because they're normalized. Boring? Yeah, you could probably say that. No longer shocking, that's for sure. It's not a taboo thing. I want trans and non-binary people to reach that level where we're just accepted, we're normalized. To reach the point where nobody is asking questions or perceiving us as a threat because we're nothing new. In fact, trans people have been around for centuries within cultures. We've seen that this move to embrace people who are different, namely tattooed people in this case, that can happen because we've lived through it. So why can't we apply that to others? Now, LGBTQ plus History Month is the first and one of the longest queer calendar events of the year. During this month, we have a chance to not only educate, but to remember and to celebrate those that paved the way for us to be here today. It sounds weird, doesn't it, when you think about it? Like, in the 21st century, an age of technology advancements where you can talk to so many people through a screen, that some people are just glad to be alive. LGBTQ plus people face prejudice, hate, and even violence all over the world simply for existing. In 2018, it was found that 1 in 3 employers admitted they're less likely to employ a trans person, regardless of how qualified they were. How messed up is that? 2018 was only 4 years ago? But a lot can happen in 4 years, right? Well, could happen, didn't happen. Because only last year, in 2021, a survey found that 65% of trans people actually hid their identity, their gender identity at work. They were too afraid to be themselves. So where's the progress? And that's the problem. Calendar events for minority groups are often just dismissed as belonging to a woke agenda, or the world's going mad, or certain people have some sort of agenda they're trying to push onto us. But just think about the people doing that dismissing. They're probably some of the people who wouldn't accept trans people in the workplace. Additionally, if we're not careful, we're simply arming those prehistoric views. Because when it comes to these calendar events, it's much easier said than done. There's a risk that it all just becomes performative. Nothing changes because the same info is shared with the same eyes. Who or what do you think of when I mention LGBTQ plus history? Stonewall Uprising? Marsha P. Johnson? Gay Liberation Front? Yeah, important events, hugely iconic people that paved the way, allowing us to be who we are today. But here's the thing. What is history? Why do we default to those events or those people? And the answer is coverage. Because, especially in the age of social media, we think of them because we're told to, whether it's on social media or in presentations like this. Well, I'm here to say no, because don't just think of those moments or people in time, because history's definition is much broader. It's less defined. 50 years ago was history, yeah, but so was 5 years ago. In fact, so was last week. So was yesterday. What about the events that have happened recently? We've lived through a huge historical event in the form of the COVID pandemic. So let's expand this internalized definition of history, because it will fast track society, allowing minority groups such as trans people to be liberated quicker. Let me give an example. In the 80s, Section 28 came into force, which effectively made it okay for people to be homophobic due to the absence of education and the lack of acceptance and the lack of presence in the media that was positive. It had a devastating effect. And whilst we remember the horrors that this piece of legislation led to, we must remember this was repealed in full. Change can happen. People can realize mistakes were made and correct them. Trans people are effectively going through the same thing right now. Lack of education and awareness, misinformation, and selective reporting in the media, even right down to hate groups spreading lies and working with an unwitting government to destabilize and to create a society that basically just benefits hateful and bigoted views. What happened during the Stonewall Uprising won't automatically save us, no matter how much we talk about it. In the same way that having A-levels or a degree won't automatically get you a job. We need to actively apply the lessons, apply what we know, and apply what we've learned. In doing so, we can honour the past achievements as we keep pushing forward. On a larger scale, continuing the fight for any sort of social justice is just as important as the start of it. So why aren't we skipping to the ending more often if we know it? Why don't we cut to the chase now and allow trans rights? That's because sadly over the years, society has become more focused on getting us to remember than making sure we act to prevent history from repeating itself. Now we need to re-establish balance, not be afraid to change something if it's not working, not be afraid to recognize mistakes and to backtrack, to correct them, especially if the past has changed so much and if anything, it's shown that things are possible and that it can be healthy for change. It's the only way we can move forward because action is what liberates minority groups. Action creates that change. And there are plenty of people around you in the here and now that are actively creating change at all levels. It doesn't have to be the Marsha P. Johnsons of the past. As an example, I'm privileged to say that I'm doing my part for those less privileged. Along with 3 others, I recently launched legal proceedings against NHS England in the High Court, basically to challenge the unlawful waiting times that trans people currently face. In England alone, there are at least 18,000 trans people waiting up to 4 or even 5 years for a first appointment at a gender clinic. A first appointment. The current legislation under the NHS states 18 weeks for a first appointment. Yeah, our waiting times measured in years. That's an action that I chose to get involved in. You don't need to go that far, not unless you want to. Some of you are already activists without even realizing, because just being visible is itself a form of activism, an everyday form, yet possibly the most important, regardless of whether you're LGBTQ+ or an ally. Being visible, sharing the right information, pushing boundaries, and taking action to avoid history repeating itself. That's where it's at. Use history to change our society's future in the same way that you would use your studying to change individual futures. Just remember though, you need to make any action meaningful, especially when it comes to being part of change on a larger scale. It can take less than a minute to share a post to your own social groups, or to point out the work of somebody you know that might not be getting the recognition it deserves. Do it. Why not? Because why should you only share those historical posts? If it's happened, it's happened. It's worth sharing. Don't be afraid to do that, because that is the only way you can get this new information, really important information, in front of new eyes. And that in itself has this knock-on effect, because people see that, it lets them know what's going on. Potentially, you're recruiting them as an ally to see the bigger picture like you do. But when you do this, when you share posts or anything like that, make sure to explain how it affects you or those around you, because relating to it is very important as well. And it could have the biggest impact on change through reaching fresh eyes that previously could not have seen any struggle through somebody else's lens. So thanks for listening to me today, just kind of whittering on for a bit. I would like to say, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away. But before you do, I just want to say that not every trans or non-binary person is happy to open up about their lives. So please don't expect everyone to readily share intimate elements about themselves if you bump into them in the street or you meet them on social media, especially if you've never met them before. It's just disrespectful. I put myself out there to be asked the inappropriate questions so that others who are perhaps more vulnerable don't have to face those questions, but also so that people can learn in a safe environment. Plus, my life's all over the media anyway, and it makes no difference to me. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and don't be afraid about getting terminology wrong. It's okay to learn, so don't be shy.
Thank you so much for that, Eva. And I can see we've got some comments coming in already, but really interesting, and a lot of really simple things that I'm sure people can take away and start, thinking about and digesting. So one of the comments that we've had is from somebody saying that when they've applied for jobs, they've had less response when being open about their gender identity than when they weren't. Which is obviously such a shame, and probably something that isn't uncommon, unfortunately.
I get asked this question a lot, like, I'm going to apply for a job. Am I legally obligated to disclose I'm trans? And technically, no. I mean, if you have a gender recognition certificate, then HR will find out, because when they do ID checks to make sure you're eligible to work, that can come up. But unless you're at that stage, technically no. And the advice I always give to people is disclose it if you feel safe. And the most important thing is think of the interview process on its head. They're interviewing you for the job, but at the same time, you're interviewing them as an employer. They want to know all about you and what you can contribute, but you need to find out, and that's your chance to find out whether they can give you the safe environment that you need to blossom in your career. So don't be afraid to ask questions, especially when they say, and do you have anything for us? And I know from having worked in companies and I've interviewed people to recruit them, and I always love it when people say, like, yeah, actually, I do have some questions. I hope you don't mind. Because it shows they're prepared. It shows that they're being transparent and honest and they want to know. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. They're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's something that's come up recently within DMU, is actually how can we as an institution be more inclusive from the moment that we start interviewing people, and things like introducing yourself with your pronouns if you're comfortable to when you first welcome somebody to interview. Again, it just highlights from the get-go, from that first interaction, that we are inclusive and we want to welcome people. So I wonder if, from your experience of interviewing people, would you have any other tips for somebody that's wanting to be more inclusive and who's wanting to create that environment from the very first moment that we meet?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you quite rightly say, when you introduce yourself and include pronouns. It's a little symbol. It's a little signifier to say, I'm on your side. I understand. I may not understand your lived experience, but I understand why you need pronouns. And that can make the world of difference, because, like, not even interviewing, if I went out to a restaurant, for example, and the server had their pronouns in the name badge, I'd be like, I'm okay, I can relax, I can enjoy this meal. And it's the same way that, we see the Progress Pride flag hung somewhere, and you're like, that's it, yeah, love it. And like, whenever I go to Manchester and I'm on the tram, I always go past like a block of apartments, and of all the windows, there's one that has the Pride flag. And every time I see it, I'm just like, yeah, cool. And it's just that little symbol, it's just that little thing to show someone we're connected. We share something, even if we're not, we don't have the same sexuality or gender identity. It's a bond. And to be inclusive and to be welcoming to gender non-conforming people, or anybody, to be frank, you need to be able to say, okay, well, what are we projecting? What little bonds are we offering? What are we saying? How do we say it? And even right from day one, when you present an application form, ask them for their pronouns. Ask what's your gender identity, if you need to know that, but do so in a way that is respectful. But you're showing them, I want to know because I care, and we use this information to ensure that all employees, for example, have out that level of care, we can make sure we look after them because we know about them. So that makes people think, okay, yeah, I'm happy to apply here. And we shouldn't have to live like that. And we're kind of like waiting for scraps, waiting for people to throw things out at us. But unfortunately, that is the world we live in, and it's up to employers out there to make that first step.
Yeah, I think you're so right. It's such a sigh of relief when you see something that just indicates that you're in a bit of a safe space, and you can let those barriers down a little bit. So, yeah, that's really important. Chris has asked about a colleague just attended a seminar on academic freedom, and you were talking about we don't just want to be thinking this, that, and we actually want to get right now to the point where we don't contest any transgender rights. He's asked the big question, which is how do we do that, which of course is a huge question, but maybe sort of how do you see that happening? What do you think are kind of maybe the first steps?
That's a great question, Chris. It's a massive question, but it can be answered quite simply. I personally, that's how I see it anyway, and that's because we know what happened with Section 28. We know. I mean, you only have to look at recently when people who were not allowed to be gay and in the military, they had honours stripped, and now it's being given back to them with an apology. We know that the apology for trans people will happen at some point in time. We just don't know when. So why not just skip that dance? Let's just get straight to it. And when it comes to fast tracking, it's being patient, because when you've got groups like the LGBT Alliance or other gender critical groups who are out there, especially on Twitter, throwing stuff in your face constantly, they want you to bite. They want you to get so angry that you show yourself up. They're hoping that you will do something that looks bad. And don't. I mean, I don't go on Twitter because of that reason. But the thing is, they're all talk. I mean, yes, some of them are quite influential, but I'll come to that in a second. But it is all talk. Like last year, I was on the cover of Boots Health and Beauty magazine as part of their International Women's Day campaign. The amount of hate that we got was unbelievable. Again, on Twitter, bizarrely, or well, on others as well, but mainly Twitter. They started hashtags. They started like this campaign to boycott Boots and all sorts. I bet you anything, those people who were involved in that campaign still shop at Boots to this day. And Christmas just gone, they were in there for their 3 for 2 offers on whatnot. They forget, they move on. It's gone, and we need to be patient. We need to ride out that period in time. Yes, there are periods where potentially there are things that threaten our rights, such as the recent issue with the EHRC, but we can fight that, and we will, because we're resilient. We just need to bide our time and show people that we are not the monsters that everybody else who hates us thinks we are, or is trying to make us like behave in that way. So be patient, be visible, and just live. Just show people that, yes, for example, just because I'm trans, I don't go out wearing something flamboyant every day. I don't do anything differently. On my social media, especially Instagram, I'll share memes and all sorts, as well as educational stuff. And that's because I want to say to people, I laugh at the same things as you do. I'm just a person too. So showing yourself is going to really help us and fast track us, because if we all do that and we all come together and say we are just people too, the world will just turn away from us and just let us be.
I think that's an incredible stance to take, actually. And I think you're right. It seems like a massive question, but actually the answer's right there. We know what that answer looks like in a way, don't we? So I guess the flip side of that would then maybe be, for anybody who's listening, who's wanting to be a more active ally and maybe has been a bit more, accepting but passive, what do you think could maybe be, a top tip, or, the first step for somebody who wants to be more active in supporting the trans or non-binary community? What should they start with?
Oh, to be fair, I never actually intended to be an activist. I kind of fell into this. I would say I'm too stubborn to let hate win. and that's what drives me. I started off with my blog before I came out, and I needed to externalize everything that was going on inside my head. I needed to just get it out there. And naively, I thought no one's going to read one blog out of millions and millions on the internet, and people did. And that made me realize there is something there, something about my lived experience people can relate to. And that for me was pretty much a starting point. I thought, I come from, a place of, well, slight privilege in that I'm doing okay. Others aren't doing okay. So what can I do to help them? And as much as we talk about equality, it's also about equity as well. What can we do to give them what they need as well? So it's about looking at your own life as a starting point, looking at what you have and thinking, if I don't have to question where my next meal comes from, and then, I'm pretty lucky. So therefore, think about those who aren't in that position. Use that as your starting point. Use your passion, but most importantly, make sure you're in a safe, healthy place, because it does take its toll on your mental health. I found that out, and luckily I've got a great support network. I've learned a lot of coping mechanisms over the years. So being able to step away from it, or know when the right time is to try and educate someone. If you come across someone who's just throwing transphobic stuff at you, they don't want to be educated. No matter what you say, they're just going to stick their fingers in their ears and go la la la, and it's like, it infuriates you, but that's what they want. So step away from it. Recognize which battles you can actually make a difference with.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think, a really good point about looking at your own life first, because I think a lot of people would automatically go with, what can I do for someone else, or what do I need to be doing? Whereas actually taking a moment to think about what you take for granted is actually a really good place to start. So thank you. We have a comment from Cal, interesting comment from Cal, who said that they have a gender non-conforming child. And how could they best be offered support?
Well, it's like, as a parent, you have the power to shape the basics, or the basic world or the structure that your child will grow up in. So, it's up to you how you do that. So make sure that if your child is gender non-conforming, if there are little clues or they've even said so, then allow that. Don't challenge it. Don't tell them that they're wrong, because kids are very switched on. We adults don't give them enough credit, and you only have to look at kids. Like, they'll say something, they'll just blurt something out without thinking, without any sort of filter, and that's just that pure honesty. They will just see it and say it. And that's what we need to allow, because if we then start saying, oh, no, you can't do that, that's for girls, that's for boys, we're just reinforcing these unwritten rules, these stereotypes. And, society needs to move on from that. And that's where parents come in. That's where parents can start saying, you know what, that language was harmful to me personally when I was growing up. I'm not going to use it for my child. And I'm not saying you have to shield them from everything that's going on in the world, but help them to understand why other people might use that, but you at home don't, and allow them to come to you and say what they need. Don't try and push anything on them. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. And kids are very honest, and they don't have those same prejudices that, start seeping in. So yeah, I think the same, it's keeping it open, because they're hopefully also not going to face some of the challenges that we did when we were growing up. And I see from a lot of students that come through, there's just a whole different environment of inclusivity and acceptance and stuff like that. So the more we can actually learn from them, the better, I think. So loads more questions coming in. So we've got a question from Melanie that I know you've written a lot about online, but a lot of the anti-trans sort of arguments are around, the threats in inverted commas, thankfully, that trans women might pose to women-only spaces. And I know you've written a lot of, really seemingly obvious challenges to these arguments, but I wondered if you wanted to sort of elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, think of it this way. They're the ones coming to you with that challenge. So it's not up to you to disprove it. It's the other way around. If they say that I'm a threat, prove it. That's how I would always approach it. When it comes to single-sex spaces, a sign on a toilet door is not going to stop someone who wants to commit rape. That's, it's that straightforward, and it's sad that we really have to kind of even say that, but yeah, it really is that. And there hasn't really been a single case where a person pretended, or a man, let's be like, let's get straight to the point. There's been no case where a man has pretended to be a woman to then go into women's only space to commit a crime like that. Not at all. There's been, as far as I know, one who was already trans. They just happened to be trans when they committed the crime. And that's what we've got to be careful of. I shared something last night on my Instagram that basically was talking about, it's one of those meme pages where they were just sharing something, and they were basically looking at a trans swimmer and how before transitioning, she was ranked like 430 something in the world. After transitioning, ranked number 1. And it was a very backhanded way of, saying, oh, that's why she did it. It's not a swimmer who wanted to be number 1. It's a swimmer who just happens to be trans. And when we look at trans athletes or even trans people in single-sex spaces, again, where's the proof? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence that trans athletes are taking over? Because as far as I know, not a single one has actually won and dominated women's sports. So again, challenge, if someone comes up to you with that, prove it. And I bet you anything, they will just squirm. They'll try and find so many other ways to get at you. And eventually they'll probably end up blocking you if it's on Twitter, because it always ends with, I'm not playing your stupid games, and block. But, at the end of the day, gone. These people know that it's not true, but they will try and push it across. But if we don't challenge it, then the people who would be our allies would just accept it. So sometimes we do have to push back a little, but doing so in a very constructive and very patient way. And again, using history is very, very important. You don't have to think back to, like, in the 80s, how people thought about gays and lesbians, that, they're out to convert children. Well, that's what trans people having to go through right now. We're too busy trying to get on with our lives. We're not trying to convert anybody. And when it comes to things like gender recognition certificates or legal recognition of somebody's gender, at the moment, it's a very bureaucratic process to have to apply for a gender recognition certificate. It takes a long time and it's very invasive. Who, in their right mind, is going to go through that entire process of years to then commit rape at the end of it? It's just stupid when you boil it down.
Yeah. Like you say, totally. And a lot of these arguments, they're based on the hypotheticals, aren't they? And you can be a hypothetical about anything. What if the opposite happens?
Yes.
So it's knowing that we can come back, and like you say,
turning it back around. Like, there's that hypothetical question or scenario of, you're more likely to be killed by a cow dropping on your head than eaten by a shark. And it's that same sort of thing. So I always find, just have fun with it, because it's your life. And if someone comes into your space throwing that sort of stuff at you, if you think it's stupid, let them know, this is how much of a joke I think your argument is, and here is why.
Yeah. I like that as a take-home message. We've got one more question, I think, and we have time for a couple more. I think just a couple more minutes. But we've got, when you do out yourself, and for most people will have to out themselves several times. It's not just that one time. There's always coming up against those assumptions and things like that. But when you out yourself, and the reaction is maybe silence or avoidance or something that's, you know, not what you would like, how would you personally deal with it?
It depends who that person is. I mean, let's face it, like, to be trans and to be out, you have to be visible. I mean, you can try and hide, but ultimately you won't be happy. And it's not like sexuality where you can just go from A to B and nobody actually knows. It's more difficult for trans women because of the effects testosterone has at puberty. It's a very powerful hormone, and the changes are irreversible. So, yeah, for trans women especially, and trans women, they're the ones that get, you know, they're on the receiving end of all this gender critical stuff. But if you were to come out to someone close to you and they say nothing, then don't be afraid to ask, are you okay with what I've just said? You know, just because you want them to accept you doesn't mean you have to bend over backwards, doesn't mean, you know, you owe them everything. It's going to be a shock. So don't be afraid to talk openly and honestly about what you've said. Answer any questions, and remember that they might get the terminology wrong, they might say the wrong thing by accident, but help someone to understand. If it's someone like, I mean, I get this, like, if I'm on public transport and I'll get someone just staring at me, I'll just ignore them. You know, if they want to stare, then let them stare. Sometimes if it really annoys me, I'll just ask if there's a particular pose they would like me in, or something like that. But pick and choose those moments. If that person means something to you, then don't be afraid to ask, to engage. If that person that you've just said, you know, I'm trans, or you've just come out to, if it's silence and it's someone who you're probably not going to see again anyway, or doesn't mean that much to you, then think, is your happiness worth this internal vicious cycle of questioning and doubting yourself just because they don't quite understand or they don't respond in a particular way? You're worth more than that. So focus on yourself. This is your time to shine.
Yeah, a lot of sort of the same themes coming through about, you know, what is worth your happiness, and I think that's a really important message. I think one of the things that, you know, is important through LGBTQ plus History Month and Pride is kind of then also flipping it on its head. So, you know, a lot of people we know are worried about doing the wrong thing, and when somebody comes out to them, you know, sometimes their reaction might just be, you know, trying to catch up. What do they want to say? Are they going to say it in the right way? You know, and a lot of the time, like you say, people will get things wrong, and it's a process for everybody. But I suppose in the theme of that, you know, if we have allies in the audience who are wondering what would be the most positive, what would be the most accepting, what would be the most affirming way to respond to somebody coming out, what would you say to them?
Be comfortable. I mean, it's like there is no one way to come out, and sometimes we need to just admit when there is no, like, nobody just appears and says, "Ta-da! This is me," and they come out and everything moves on. You'll find you coming out is a stage, it's a process, and it happens over and over. Like, I did it to my best friend, then my wife, and then close people around me, and then within the workplace. So yeah, it's like you've got to do it and build it in stages. And if you're not ready, then don't, because it's your story, it's your journey. And just getting to the point of being ready to come out is a huge thing. So don't pressurize yourself to then have to take that final step if you're not fully ready. Do it in stages. I would definitely say make sure you've got good people around you who support you, so that when you go on to the next stage, for example, the workplace, and you come out and you may not get that reception that you expected, or you might encounter some negativity, you've got people and a support network to fall back on to help you through it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I think we've got just a couple of minutes left, but I think we've had some really great questions and some really great conversations. So I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for sharing all of your experience with us. Like you say, you know, important for people to realize that not everybody out there is going to be comfortable in sharing their experience in the same way. But thank you very much for sharing what you've shared with us today. I think it's been really honest, really open. you know, there's a lot of things for people to go away and think about. And I think, you know, some of those things about doing what's right for you and doing what you're comfortable with and making sure, you know, that you're also doing what's best for you, and that, you know, you don't have to go out and be fighting people. You don't have to be waiting for people to come to you, but taking, you know, ownership of what's, you know, right for you. And the same that even, you know, even within the LGBTQ community and beyond that, that, you know, we can all support each other to do that. So that's been great. So thank you again. Thank you to the audience. Like I said, we've had some really open, honest, brilliant questions. So just a reminder, we've got a lot more events going on within DMU Pride, and the recording of this will be available, I think, for a couple of weeks. So thank you again to everybody, and thank you particularly to you, Eva. It's been a really great, interesting talk.
Thank you, and thanks for coming on, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.